Some of us on our spiritual journey get attracted to the wrong kind of spiritual teacher, perhaps even a cult or a dangerous religion that's sort of got power issues, or perhaps a false prophet type personality, or maybe a spiritual narcissist or sociopath. And we find ourselves embroiled and being taken advantage of and being used and being a part of some organization or under some teacher that is quite toxic and quite false, and spreading some sort of false word that's really about what they are trying to get out of their teaching for their own benefit. And so this is reasonably common for people to have this happen to them if they're going to go through a spiritual awakening in their lifetime. So this video is for you if you resonate with that, you've been sort of tied up with some sort of a difficult organization or teacher in the past, and you are going through an awakening. And the reason I'm talking about this is because this is quite a difficult pattern to break, to go from having had something bad happen to us in the past to do with spirituality specifically, and then go through an awakening and being able to trust the awakening process, perhaps even trust opening up to another teacher, is going to be particularly difficult. So I call this a karmic pattern. So for me, it's something that's been brought into this lifetime to be resolved, that originated in past lives. That's just how I see it, take it or leave it. There is much karma to do with spirituality and religion for a majority of people. So even if you've had nothing to do with religion in this life, if you're going through an awakening, it's still going to bring up past lives, past karma to do with spirituality, to do with being a spiritual teacher, to do with how far you went with awakening in past lives, to do with religion, and if you're a fake teacher, and all of these kinds of things. That theme is going to be very important if you're going through an awakening, and all of those elements will need to be resolved. I personally resolved a lot of that through doing past life regressions, but I was a past life regressionist at that time. So that resonated with me to go to the core past lives and see all the different spiritual past lives and what effect they had on this current life. I would suggest that if past lives resonate with you, that is quite an effective way to heal this particular type of karma. But also, if it doesn't resonate with you, that's totally fine. You don't need to believe in past lives to go through an awakening. It's just helpful for some people. Instead, you can just focus on what's unfolded in this life, perhaps look at parental patterns and patterns around teachers and that type of thing. But I'll get into that further as we go along, if you're just wanting to focus on healing this pattern through this life instead. So obviously, if you've been caught up in something like this in the past, or perhaps you're already or you're currently in a situation like this, or maybe you've had multiple times where this pattern has played out and you've gone from teacher to teacher that has had this certain way of being very unhelpful, then of course you're going to have trouble when you're going through an awakening to know who to trust, and whether you can trust awakening, and whether you can trust your empty self, even your true self. So you're going to have trust issues. You're going to have issues around discernment and be learning lessons to do with that. And it's going to be challenging. So this pattern makes awakening difficult. There are a lot of patterns that make awakening difficult, but this one, because it is spiritual by nature, is what adds to the difficulty level. It certainly can be broken, but there's going to be quite a lot of work that needs to be involved to sort of heal that past trauma, really, that happened, spiritual trauma that happened, so that it's relinquished enough so that you can see clearly and be able to establish a true teacher from a false teacher. So I would say the majority of people are learning that test, or that lesson, let's call it a lesson, and that is to tell the difference between a true awakening teacher and a false awakening teacher. False just meaning that they're not awake, perhaps, all the way from that to cult leader. So we'll just categorize everyone there. So there are some wonderful teachers out there, and I'm not going to go into a talk about false teachers and that type of thing. But just to say that there are false teachers out there, there's also wonderful, authentic, awake teachers out there as well. But one of the lessons that the majority of people I see in this modern age have at the moment is to see what is a true teacher. Can I tell the difference between someone that's awake and someone that's helpful and ethical and someone that's trustworthy? Or am I choosing someone from my parental wounds, from my childhood patterns? Is the inner child, the wounded inner child, choosing a teacher and not really choosing someone that's going to help me with awakening, but for wounded reasons, and perhaps choosing someone that perhaps is deluded or even dangerous? So just hearing that can be quite triggering, and thinking about the people that we're following. It is a hard practice to look at this, but it is necessary if we want to try and learn this type of particular spiritual discernment. So although everybody is really learning this, and once you've learned it, so you can tell intuitively, it becomes very obvious to you what a true teacher is and what a teacher is that's perhaps not worth following. And once you have that and you've worked that out, which you could take your whole life trying to figure that out, it's a very big lesson that I see most people working on. I do find that that lesson carries over into future lives. And so you don't have to do it again. So once you get that, and if you haven't completed the awakening process, I'm pretty confident, but don't know for sure, that that gets carried over into future lives. So you don't have to go through that whole process that is quite lengthy and uses up a lot of time with awakening, with you sort of going in often not so helpful directions. So once you learn it, you get to carry it over, and then you can spot a true teacher straight away from that moment onward. That being said, there are still people that are struggling with the karmic pattern of attracting really toxic or dangerous people, or people that they trusted and who manipulated them. So there are lots of spiritual narcissists and sociopaths out there, unfortunately, and anyone can start a YouTube channel and claim to be wherever they are and spread whatever message they want. That's one of the wonderful things about the age we're in, but also one of the challenging things is that there's no one moderating that. There's no one. So it's really about, we have to take responsibility for how we're choosing our content and who we're watching, and start to learn that we can be doing this from unconscious wounded childhood patterns, and just to be aware of that and to try and heal that, perhaps through therapy or however we want to do it, so that we can start to see more clearly. So we're just going to really start to project unknowingly and unconsciously our parental patterns onto teachers, and be attracted to a certain type of teacher that we think is going to heal the father wound, the absent father that we had, or the controlling mother that we had. And we do this totally unconsciously. But what that does is it gets us to attract people that perhaps aren't awake, or perhaps they've got some sort of shadowy stuff that they haven't worked through. And so it's not going to be a fantastic dynamic, and it could be all the way to outright dangerous. So if we've been involved with someone that didn't work out well for us in regards to teaching, then of course we're going to have some trust issues moving forward in regards to spirituality and choosing teachers. So do I think that everybody has to have a teacher? I don't. I think the days of following a guru and that model is outdated and not really helpful and not applicable to the modern world, although some people still want to do it, but I think it's being phased out. The modern awakening is more about that we have all this content, all this information, all these teachers available to us online, but we need to develop the skills to learn how to differentiate between them and see which things are actually useful. And that's more about tuning into our intuition. So it's less about who the teacher is really specifically, and more about us learning to tune into our intuition. So it's helping us to learn that, through the process of listening to content and choosing teachers, and perhaps getting burnt or feeling disheartened or whatever it is. So if you have been severely traumatized by a teacher in the past, then I highly recommend that you get some therapy, perhaps outside of spirituality, like more like trauma therapy, on that trauma specifically. And really someone that's not spiritual, a therapist that's not spiritual, would be helpful for that, to really try to ground you and to help you to see that you're safe and not bring in any type of spirituality just for that time being. Even putting down any sort of spiritual practice or listening to spiritual stuff just for a little while could also really help while you try to soothe and heal that time for that thing that happened. That's just my suggestion anyway. Then you can pick up spirituality again once it's sort of been healed a bit. Because if we just carry that with us, if we've had some, terrible thing happen to us, and we trusted someone and we got hurt, and we don't do any healing on it, we're just carrying it along with us. It doesn't go anywhere. And so we're now just got these extra layers of trauma, of the spiritual trauma, really. And as we're going through an awakening, we're going to be projecting that onto teachers. Perhaps we won't be able to see, maybe there is a very genuine teacher that is really going to, that wants to help you and perhaps can help you, but your distorted perception of them because of your trauma is that, you might think that they're a terrible person and misinterpret the things that they say. So trauma really distorts the way we perceive the world. Or perhaps you might pick the same type of person again. You're blind to the fact that you see someone that seems very charming and nice and is very kind to you and welcoming to you, and you fall for the same pattern again, and you end up with another teacher that is the same, that is narcissistic, that is a sociopath, that it wants to use you or whatever. So some people can just keep falling for it over and over again. The trick is to really heal the underlying issues. So could be done in past lives. Probably even more effective is to heal the trauma from this life, from childhood, where it started, it remanifested in form, the karma. And it may look like spiritual trauma as a child. It's very common for people that are going through an awakening to have spiritual trauma as children. This could look like having spiritual parents that preach to you, having religious parents, being born into a strict religion, being forced to participate in religion when you didn't want to, being born into a cult. There's all kinds of variation of spiritual trauma that could happen from childhood. So you could go straight to the healing the trauma from the spiritual trauma from childhood, and that's going to have a good effect on you being able to see teachers more clearly and understand awakening and trust it more. Even if you didn't have spiritual trauma around religion, that type of thing, as a child in this life, if you had a toxic parent, such as a narcissistic parent, for example, you may find that you attract spiritual teachers that have a similar kind of personality disorder or a similar kind of personality and toxic behaviors. And this is in a way that we unconsciously try to heal the parental wound, because we see spiritual teachers as an authority figure. Whether we realize that or not, we then, it really is a manifestation of our parental wounds. And so for some people, they just attract, like their father or their mother through spiritual teachers trying to heal that, and someone that can be quite toxic if your parent was also that way. So again, it's about healing the parental wound, perhaps in therapy, and going to the core of it, and dealing with that as deeply as you can. And that's going to stop you from attracting that same type of person once that's healed as a teacher. And then you'll be able to see more clearly that teacher's a false teacher, or that teacher's a dangerous teacher, that teacher's narcissistic, they're only in it for themselves. And this teacher here seems more genuine. You really have a distorted filter if you were brought up by parents, or a parent that had some serious issues and were quite toxic, like a narcissist or a psychopath or even a severe mental illness or something like that, your perception of being able to pick an authority figure, such as a spiritual teacher, is going to be quite distorted, and it's going to be quite difficult for you to choose someone that's healthy while you have that still operating. And then just learning a bit about trust in general, and, learning that trust is something that is worked out over time, where a person, so say the spiritual teacher, proves themselves to be trustworthy over time and is consistent, not perfect. They're still human, but they're consistent, and they do what they say they're going to do, and they don't do things for themselves, because awakening teaching is nothing to do with the teacher and nothing to do with being devoted to the teacher. If it's about the teacher, they're not awake, because when you're awake, it's got nothing to do with the personal story, and you have no interest in whoever this character is supposed to be. It's about the teaching, it's about the Dharma. So if they're talking and they've got all these big ideas about how you're going to save the world, and how your support to them, the more devoted you are, the sooner you'll wake up. There's lots of promises. It perhaps sounds too good to be true, like just do this 5-week package and you'll be enlightened. Things like that are red flags, and just to start to be really cautious and perhaps even a little bit skeptical if you've been burnt in the past. And that's okay initially, but we don't want to close down so much that we don't trust anyone, and also don't trust the awakening process, because we're going to get blocked in this life and unfortunately not make any more progress with awakening, which would be a real shame. So besides healing the trauma itself, we can start to learn about trust and start to very gently move from skepticism to start to pay attention and see that perhaps there are some kind, true, authentic teachers out there. Let's not put everyone in the same boat because I was burnt before. Perhaps we start to develop these beliefs of spirituality is bad, perhaps, or I can't trust a spiritual teacher. All gurus are false, or whatever. We're going to have these ideas from being burnt, which is understandable, that we are going to carry with us, but that's really going to block our awakening, truly, because we are going to need some help along the way. We may not need a teacher ongoing, but we're going to need to check in with someone from time to time. We can't do it all on our own, because then it's basically ego leading the way of awakening, and you just get into deeper and deeper layers of delusion. So we just need someone to check in with from time to time that is awake, that can make sure that you're just not sort of going off on some tangent, really, and just to straighten out the path a little bit. That's all. Most of the awakening is done by yourself, but a teacher just points. That's really the job of the teacher. They point and they lead by example of their own life of being an enlightened person living life. And so that's really the purpose of a spiritual teacher. Anything more than that with promises and whatever is very suspicious and a red flag. So if you're looking at a new teacher and you've been burnt in the past and you're trying to establish whether this tradition might be good for you or this teacher might be good for you, do lots of research, of course, talk to people, go online, see what people think of them. Know that you're probably also going to be talking to other people that might be wounded or have similar karmic patterns to you, so they may also be blind to what's going on with that teacher. So just remain a little skeptical, but open enough to be able to be open to the truth and ask. So say, I am guarded, I know that, but that's okay. That's going to keep me safe. But I just want to be open enough. Can you just show me the truth about this person? Can you just show me life? Can you show me? And so do a bit of research, and then you can go along to their events or whatever it is, but just keep that little bit of skepticism there and just say over time they need to prove that they're trustworthy. And if I come across any red flags that I've learned from the past that are red flags, I have to promise myself that I'm going to get out of here and not fall asleep again back into that old karmic pattern, which is going to feel so easy to fall back into, and you're going to lose some more years with another organization that isn't healthy for you. So can I just remain alert and like a little bit skeptical, but still open, and attend events and look out for the red flags. Be there, attending, looking out for let the teacher prove that they are trustworthy. And then over time, start to let your guard down and start to trust them. If it's too much and you just feel like I can't trust another teacher or organization again, that's okay. That it's not necessary to have a teacher and to be part of an organization. In fact, sometimes it can be a hindrance to awakening, honestly. So do the majority of your awakening on your own, and just see if you can find someone that you can just check in, even if it's once every 6 months, but just from time to time, that you trust, that you build trust over time, that you know has your best interests at heart. That's not really getting anything from it other than obviously financial gain if it's a business. So we have to be very realistic and pragmatic when it comes to this pattern. We have to be on guard and a little bit of that skeptical edge if it's happened to us in the past, because there's a high probability that we could repeat the pattern, particularly if we haven't healed the underlying issue, like the underlying trauma. Usually parental wounds is what it's going to be. We're going to just keep attracting that same thing in different variations of different people, the parental wounds over and over again. So it's like, can I just go to the core of it and start to heal some of the parental wounds? And then all of a sudden, it's like things will get cleared up and you'll be able to see the other teachers for what they truly are, and really start to see, okay, I think I can start to discern now between a true teacher and a false teacher. And it's not because everybody else likes that person. Everyone else is, I'm not listening to the masses. That's a part of the trance, is that we follow along with everyone else. So if one teacher's popular, just because they're popular, we assume that they're awake. And unfortunately, it's usually sort of the opposite when it comes to awakening. So if we do these sort of more asleep behaviors where we just follow the masses and go very unconscious and don't do our own work with research, discernment, our lessons around where we're up to with trust, and apply that to each teacher or even each therapist or healer, then we're going to find that we just get sucked straight back into that old karmic pattern again. So this is a very tricky one. That's why I wanted to talk about it sort of at length a little bit today. I hope that gives you some pointers just to know which direction to go in if you have been burnt in the past, that perhaps go and get some trauma therapy on that specific spiritual trauma, and maybe even put awakening on pause just for a little while until things clear up and they start to become a bit more just stable. And then I would, pick up awakening again if it feels right for you.